Hello, everyone. My name is Pastor Sean, and welcome yourselves to the new lecture video entitled The Evils, Necessary, Unnecessary, Tragedies, Pain as an Author of Endings, and Pain as a Teacher. I have been making a series of these videos, and I'm going to continue making more series of these videos where they're just going to be one-offs. I'm also going to start just like Jordan Peterson's biblical psychology series. That is what I'm going to be doing when I start. So next week, I'm going to be doing the introduction for those videos, and I'm going to be discussing the book of Philemon and do an exegesis of the entire book of Philemon from the New Testament. So that's something to look forward to. Not so much in a sense of psychology-wise, by looking at the Bible from a psychological standpoint, but more so of just Calvin-style exegesis of the book with breakdowns of different parts in the book and breakdowns of all the verses. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to be reading off the Wikipedia, and this is going to be another jump around video where it's more of an exploration of evil, and evil in the sense of according to the Christian worldview. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Evil, according to a Christian worldview, is any action, thought, or attitude that is contrary to the character or will of God. This is shown through the law given in both the Old and New Testament. There is no moral action given in the Bible that is contrary to God's character or God's will. Therefore, evil in the Christian worldview is contrasted by and in conflict with God's character or God's will. This evil shows itself through divination from the character or the will of God. Before I continue with reading this, I would just like to state that to give my opinion on what exactly evil is. Evil is sin, and both of these things tie together. It could be a mindset where the thought or action controls the person. That's something that is of wickedness, whether it be political or whether it be a part of an upheaval against something, whether it be even small things that could be even as small and look as lovely and cute like as a kitten per se. It is the opposite of the morality code that is given by God. So what is the opposite of godliness and goodness is evil. And it can be seen around all of us all the time. Everyone in the human race other than Jesus Christ, who was born of the Holy Spirit after Archangel Gabriel came to the Mother Mary. But evil in its definition is the complete opposite of God. And I know that from an atheist standpoint, there are a lot of not just atheists or somewhat theists that are still treading the line, but there's a lot of people out there that believe that through their journeys that they can become godly themselves, in a sense of becoming or finding their own kind of morality without God. And but even in my opinion, that is also a sense of wickedness and evilness, because it's still a cutoff from the Father. It's still a cutoff from the Holy Spirit and Jesus. They are beings completely of goodness and light. So That's wickedness and evil is basically, just to put it in a small nutshell, it is the complete opposite of God. So to continue, I'm going to be speaking of the devil here, which is the devil is the embodiment of evil. And we're talking about his hierarchies, his legions, and there is also, if you flip the Bible and God's hierarchy upside down, because there's the Trinity, there's also a Trinity of the devil. So, anyways, I'm going to continue reading this. The devil, in opposition to the will of God, represents evil and tempts Christ, the personification of character and will of God. And that's from R.A. Schaeffer of 1854. That's the quote. Christian theology draws its concepts of evil from the Old and New Testament. The Christian Bible exercises, in quote, the dominant influence upon ideas about God and evil in the Western world, end quote. In the Old Testament, evil is understood to be an opposition of God, which is what I was just speaking of, as well as something unsuitable or inferior, such as the leader of the fallen angels, which is Satan. In the New Testament, the Greek word poneros is used to indicate unsuitability, while kakos is used to refer to opposition to God in the human realm. Officially, the Catholic Church extracts its understanding of evil from its canonical antiquity, and the Dominican theologian Thomas Aquinas, who in Summa Theologica defines evil as the absence or privation of good. French-American theologian Henry Blocher describes evil, when viewed as a theological concept, as an unjustifiable reality. In common parlance, evil is something that occurs in the experience that ought not to be, which would be, I believe he is describing sin here and the sin nature of man. Also, we'll be looking at this like a Rubik's Cube in several, in a sphere, where one side's going to be Christianity, another one Catholicism, another one Mormonism, another one from a secular standpoint, and also these speak a very, very and speak somewhat about Islam and how Islam in the Quran talks about evil. So to get evil in several different aspects. Also, I'm going to be sounding sluggish in today's video like I did in last week's video. I've been ill of sinus problems with sinus headaches and stuffy noses and just face pressure and whatnot. So that's why I sound so sluggish right now. Okay, let's continue. In Mormonism, mortal life is viewed as a test of faith, where one's choices are central to the plan of salvation. See Agency LDS Church. Evil is that which keeps one from discovering the nature of God. It is believed that one must choose not to be evil to return to God. Christian Science believes that evil arises from a misunderstanding of the goodness of nature, which is understood as being inherently perfect if viewed from the correct spiritual perspective. That's actually incorrect. Misunderstanding God's reality leads to incorrect choices, which are termed evil. This has led to the rejection of any separate power being the source of evil. Okay, yeah, that's not right. Or of God as being the source of evil. Instead, the appearance of evil is the result of a mistaken concept of good. Christian scientists argue that even the most evil person does not pursue evil for its own sake, but from the mistaken viewpoint that he or she will achieve some kind of good thereby. Okay, so what it states here for the religion of Islam, for evil, that there is no concept of absolute evil in Islam as a fundamental universal principle that is independent from an equal with good in a dualistic sense. Within Islam, it is considered essential to believe that all comes from God. So that would be also, so that's a Trinity concept. If you mixed Islam with Mormonism, then you also mix it with what is that other one? I'm going to look it up. It is Hinduism. So they believe that the essence of their gods are in everything. Okay, so it comes from God, whether it is perceived as good or bad by individuals. And things that are perceived as good or bad are either natural events, natural disasters, or illnesses, quote unquote, or caused by humanity's free will. Much more the behavior of beings with free will than they disobey God's orders, harming others or putting themselves over Allah or others is considered to be evil. Or also putting yourself, I'm not exactly sure if the Muslim that puts himself over Muhammad would also be considered their type of evil. I'm actually not sure about that. If you do know about that, go ahead and put that in the comments. But anyways, a typical understanding of evil is reflected by Al-Ashri, founder of Ashriism. Accordingly, qualifying something as evil depends on the circumstances of the observer. An event or action itself is neutral, but it receives its qualification by God. Since God is omnipotent and nothing can exist outside God's power, God's will determine whether or not something is evil. According to Amida, understanding of Islam, I'm completely butchering this name, evil does not have a positive existence in itself and is merely the lack of good, just as darkness is the result of the lack of light. Okay, and the last one for this before we get to the Friedrich Nietzsche's rejection of Judeo-Christian morality would be the Zoroastrianism. Oh no, Zoroastrianism. I'm having a hard time pronouncing that word. In the originally Persian region or religion of, I'll say just Zoroism, the world is a battleground between the god Ahura Mazda, also called Or Mazd, and the malignant spirit Angra Mainyu, also called Adhiraman. I'm completely probably butchering these names. The final resolution of the struggle between good and evil was supposed to occur on the Day of Judgment, in which all beings that have lived with will be led across a bridge of fire, and those who are evil will be cast down forever. In Afghan belief, so also Afghan, angels and saints are beings sent to help us achieve the path towards goodness, which is something that I also do believe in Christianity that also happens when it comes to angels being sent down from heaven, and they take the forms of humans or the forms of animals to protect us, help us, or to speak to us without us knowing that we're in the presence of angels to for ultimately God's plan. Very briefly, I would like to speak on angels and the fallen angels, demons, and how I believe that here in our realm on earth, these angels and demons are both shapeshifters, being that they can shape their voices, how they sound, what they look like, and being able to shape into beasts, or shape into people, or shape into other demons or other monsters. So I just like to speak on that very briefly, and that will have to be I can go more into detail about that in research in angels and demons, and not talking about them as mythological characters, but as actual beings in our world. But that will have to be a completely different video. So I'm going to look at the Friedrich Nietzsche's mindset here when it comes to the rejection of Judeo-Christian morality. So he addresses this in two works, which are Beyond Good and Evil, which I do plan on buying, and on the genealogy of morals, where he essentially says that the natural, functional, non-good has been socially transformed into the religious concept of evil by the slave mentality of the weak and oppressed masses who resent their masters, the strong, quote unquote. Okay. Next, I would also like to speak of the, one moment. And for this next part, to get another viewpoint, I would like to speak about Carl Jung, who says here on his Wikipedia page was a Swiss psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, who founded analytical psychology. And this man also has his opinions on what evil is. So in Carl Jung's book, Answer to Job, or maybe Answer to Job, and elsewhere, depicted evil as the dark side of God. People tend to believe evil is something external to them because they project their shadow onto others. Jung interpreted the story of Jesus as an account of God facing his own shadow. We're going to have to break that one down, because that's, though it is definitely an interesting idea to a person who believes in sola scriptura, like myself, who believes in the red letters, and that there is no contradictions in the Holy Bible, in the but I'm speaking of the original scrolls, going back to Aramaic, Greek, and also Aramaic, Greek, and there's another one. I'll look it up and put it in the video later. That there are no flaws in it. So by it's stating that God cannot be an evil God, and I know I was doing some research for this video. I found the Evil God Challenge. I'm not really going to speak on that in this video, but perhaps in another video. This one is an impossibility, because the story of Jesus as an account of him facing his own shadow, and that the dark side of God would suggest that there is wickedness within him. I think it's just a lack of understanding, and I've believed this for a very long time now, at least 8-9 years now, believing that it is an impossibility for God to have a dark side. Now, the rebellious God, or the other God, the God of this realm that I spoke about in the last week's video, Satan, would be complete embodiments of evil. So there would be no good side of Satan, per se. Like, in a sense, God is not able to face his own shadow, in the fact that when Jesus was born of a virgin, the Holy Spirit cast a shadow upon Mary, and then she became pregnant. He did not have the original sin of birth, which casts all of us down into a fallen state. Being that I believe that all men, women, and children are in a fallen state. Children, not so much per se, because I do believe in the age of accountability, but there still is wickedness in all once they come out of their mother's womb, other than Jesus. He was the only one that did not have a human, like just a regular birth, like the rest of humanity. He had a virgin birth, meaning that the man was of pure light, and being that he acted upon the will of the Father, and the Father being a being of light, a formless being of light himself, Jesus is not able to sin. He is not able to be wicked. He does not have a dark side, even though it is interesting. It definitely is interesting that evil can be depicted as that by Carl Jung here, but it is not true. Now, to continue with Carl Jung, Carl Jung's book, Answer to Job, even though the book may have had a sudden birth, its gestation period in Jung's unconsciousness was long. The subject of God and what Jung saw as the dark side of God was a lifelong preoccupation. An emotional and theoretical struggle with the core nature of deity is evident in Jung's earliest fantasies and dreams. So I did speak at the beginning of the video that this was going to be less of a psychological, more of a theological standpoint, but I did forget here that for my notes I got yesterday, I also got from Nietzsche and Carl Jung, so there will be psychological aspects to this. But anyways, as well as in his complex relationships with his father, a traditional minister, quote unquote, and his mother, who had a strong spiritual / mythical dimension, unquote, and the Christian church itself. Jung's account of his childhood in his quasi-autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, New York Vintage, 1963, end quote, provides deep personal background about his early religious roots and conflicts. Next, I will be reading The Problem of Evil. So, looking at evil as a viewpoint that it would actually be problematic to the person, to the individual person. So, the problem of evil refers to the question of how to reconcile the existence of evil within an omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient, one moment. Sorry, my apologies. The word is omniscient. So, omniscient and omnipotent God. An argument from evil attempts to show that the coexistence of evil and such a God is unlikely or impossible. Attempts to show the contrary have traditionally been discussed under the heading of theosophy. Besides philosophy of religion, the problem of evil is also important to the field of theology and ethics. The problem of evil is often formulated in two forms: the logical problem of evil and the evidential problem of evil. So those two. The logical form of the argument tries to show a logical impossibility in the coexistence of good and evil, while the evidential form tries to show that given the evil in the world, it is improbable that there is an omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good God. The problem, well, that is from our basic human understanding by saying it's the same straw man fallacy. It's the same fallacy when someone asks, well, there's so much suffering in the world, so how can a good God exist? So, I mean, this is something that I've asked myself many times when I was in high school and coming out of high school and going into the liberal colleges, which is, what I've done. But this in itself is a fallacy, just because we're not able to, just to break this down also in a small nutshell, just because we're not able to understand why it is this way doesn't mean that God doesn't exist and that there is not a God of light that holds everything dear and holds everything in his hand. Anyways, the problem of evil has extended to non-human life forms, to include animal suffering from natural evils and human cruelty against animals. So, this is definitely something when it comes to evil in the form of, or in the fact that it truly does exist completely. Even by going on the dark web and taking a stroll for a little while, you'd be able to see on there. Not having to go out like what I said that I heard from a sermon by Pastor Robert Furrow of the Calvary Church that I talked about in last week's video, that when he was in the middle of his Sunday morning service, he said if I took a staff and hit it against the ground on the stage here, in Tucson, we would not be able to go a mile out as if it was a sonic boom. So a circle going in all directions. We would not be able to get far. He said we would not be able to get far without seeing something disgusting or gross or sinful or anything of a grotesque nature. And even if it's a small thing, like say a man is cheating on his wife, let's just say, for example, or something that can be even very, very much extreme when it comes to skeletons in the closet type of thing. But anyways, so cruelty against animals, and you can see definitely on those videos and how a lot of the fast food chains are run, that it is there as evidence that wickedness exists. You cannot deny that of animal suffering. So I do completely understand that viewpoint, and I do understand where atheists and people that would consider themselves somewhat theists, or even people who are vegans, vegetarians, whatnot, of a liberal mindset that choose to only eat plant-based foods. So that's completely understandable, and gives great evidence to wickedness in our world, in this realm. So anyways, to continue, responses to various versions of the problem of evil, meanwhile, come in three forms: refutation, defenses, and theodicities. A wide range of responses have been made against these arguments. There are also many discussions of evil and associated problems in other philosophical fields, such as secular ethics and evolutionary ethics. But as usually understood, the problem of evil is posed in a theological context. And that's where I believe that because it's easy to see where morality comes from when it comes from raising it up against the perfect word of God in the Bible, and raising morality against God, as opposed to raising morality in an individual person. The problem of evil acutely applies to monotheistic religions such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism that believe in a monotheistic God who is impotent, omniscient, I can't pronounce that, and omnibenevolent. But it has been studied in religions that are non-theistic or polytheistic, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. Logical problems with evil. So, originating with the Greek philosopher Epicurus, the logical argument from evil is as follows. Number one, if an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God exists, then evil does not. Number two, there is evil in the world. Number three, therefore, an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God does not exist. This argument is of the form of modus tollens and is logically valid. If its premises are true, the conclusion follows of necessity. To show that the first premise is plausible, subsequent versions tend to expand on it, such as this modern example, which is 8 different examples here. Number 1, God exists. Number 2, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Number 3, an omnibenevolent being would want to prevent all evils. Number 4, an omnipotent being knows every way in which evil can come into existence and knows every way in which those evils could be prevented. Number 5, an omnipotent, being that the power to prevent that evil from coming into existence. Number 6, a being who knows every way in which an evil can come into existence, who is able to prevent that evil from coming into existence, and who wants to do so would prevent the existence of that evil. If there exists an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God, then no evil exists. Evil exists. Number 8, logical contradiction. Now, like I was saying earlier, just because it's rational and logical to say that because I see something evil and that evil exists, therefore God doesn't exist because God didn't stop it. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that there is a light that doesn't exist. And there are people out there that, from whatever I say or somebody else says, that defends the faith and that defends God. Whatever I say, defending my stance on this is going to be, could be used as cannon fodder for the other person to prove their point. You know, just in a debating, in a way of debating or arguing. But my thing is that even though I believe in a all-powerful deity, even though I believe in the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus Christ, and being that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, it doesn't mean that we can't live in harmony with each other. I don't use the Bible as cannon fodder to upload and to use this to put into my cannons to go into warfare, to use it on a battleground. I have personally never seen anyone come to the faith through debating. Personally, in my personal experience, I've never seen that. But my point that I'm getting across here, whether it be any tragedies that have befallen you or your family members or your friends, because it's the same old with every person who, including myself in the past, who chosen not to believe in God or to believe in something else, and blames God for the bad things that have happened to them, whether it be a tragedy or whatever. Everything comes into accordance with the will of God. So what Satan and man had created and formed from a scheme to do evil against one person, God has to allow that in order for that to happen. So in the scheme of things, for ultimate good in the universe, in our world, God allows it because he is the authoritative one in our galaxy, in the entire universe, in our world. He is the reason that we breathe. He is the reason that our hearts are beating. And just because a tragedy had befallen you of losing a friend, losing a family member, or losing your job, whatnot, and I've been in this place myself many times where I blamed God for what I felt, where he was not looking out for me, my best interests, allowing things to happen to me when I felt at the time, or even maybe still feel now deep inside, that should not have happened. Why didn't he stop that? I can recommend 2 different videos for the viewers, and not to be used as cannon fodder to go against Christianity and go against God, but just to gain an understanding from our side. And let me go ahead and give you these 2 YouTube videos. I'll go ahead and also put the links in the description. Okay, so the first one here is a debate. The video is called Debate is the New Testament Evil, and it is a 3-hour debate of Dr. James White versus Silverman. So that is the first video, and I will pull up the next video to check out. And I just found the second video. It is called Doug Met Jesus in Person 9/28/17 from Fellowship of the Martyrs 1 from fellowshipofthemartyrs.com. And this is a 41-minute video of his experience in meeting Jesus. What Jesus had told him, and not giving up, everything will be made right in the end, is the general idea of this video. And I do cite as Doug Perry as one of my biggest influences in making these psychology/theology videos, and also Dr. James White, being that I do normally watch The Dividing Line. understanding God through apologetics. So, yeah, so those are the two videos, and I just linked both of those in the description to help you get an understanding of evil and why things have happened in your life and your loved ones' lives, to try to help you get an understanding. Okay, and on the other side of the coin for this video, after speaking of the problems with evil and the supposed logical fallacies, I'm going to be now breaking down from a website, focusonthefamily.com, in the question of how can God allow so much evil and suffering? Why does the world have evil in it? Okay, so now I'm going to start reading now. Probably one of the greatest challenges faced by Christianity and Christians is the reality of evil and suffering. At times, even great thinkers are baffled by the seeming contradiction between the existence of a loving God and the fact of evil. Upon the death of his wife, C.S. Lewis wrote, and quote, "Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms, but go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is in vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside." End quote. And I've been actually in this situation before with an old friend who now she considers me an enemy when I try not to consider her that, mother, where I did feverishly pray for about 30 to 35 minutes for the health and the removal of the disease or illness, and unfortunately, her mother ended up dying, and I walked away from Christ for a while after that. But anyways, to continue with this, fortunately, Lewis came to grips with his grief and in the end realized that God not only exists, but that he is indeed all-loving despite our sufferings. Still, for Christians and non-Christians, evil and suffering are often at the forefront of our minds, particularly when we ourselves are suffering. How could a good God allow so much evil? Why doesn't he do something about it? Couldn't God have created a world without evil? These are important questions, and while we cannot solve them all neatly in one short article, we can address evil and suffering and begin to offer some possible solutions to the seeming dilemma. So the problem of evil, which is what I was speaking about earlier, which is also on this website of focusonthefamily.com, solving the seeming contradiction between a loving God and the reality of evil is usually referred to as a theodicy, theodicy, Theodicy. A theodicity attempts to solve the apparent tensions in what is often termed the problem of evil. But the problem of evil is really a series of problems. Like many large problems, sometimes it is helpful to break them down into their components. Evil, you see, actually extends not only to the moral world, but also to the natural world. When human beings do bad things to one another, this is moral evil. But so-called natural disasters are often considered evil as well because of all the suffering they cause. Earthquakes, tidal waves, floods, and so forth are examples of what might be termed natural evil. So the next part, what is evil? One helpful approach to solving the problem of evil has to do with defining evil. Christian thinker Augustine defined evil not as a thing in and of itself, but as a parasite on good. Something that is lacking is not a thing in itself. For instance, if you have a hole in your jacket, the hole is not something, but rather the hole is something is lacking. Similarly, oh my goodness, I cannot talk today. Augustine considered evil something that is missing. Indeed, it requires good to exist because it is a parasite. In the sense, Augustine defined evil as a privation, a lack of something rather than a thing or substance. This solves some important criticisms. If evil is not an actual thing, then God cannot be the author of evil. God is the author of good, but we make moral choices that result in evil. I agree with that, but I also don't agree with that. Okay, so going on to the next part, does evil argue against God? So this would be the biggest point of the video. Atheists, skeptics, and other critics of Christianity often argue against God on the basis of the reality of evil and suffering. C, they say, since evil and suffering exist, God must not exist. Sometimes they will argue that God may exist, but perhaps he is a weak God, and incompetent, or even an evil one, which is what we talked about earlier. But do evil and suffering really mean that God does not exist? Some Christians have responded by turning the skeptics' argument on its head, which is something okay, so this is also like a straw man argument. This fallacy is definitely not good on the Christian's part or the theist part when trying to defend God by taking it, flipping it upside down, and giving it back to the other person. That's something you should not do if you have to debate this, and showing that God, it's more of a stance of morality, actually, where you should not do that in how, by flipping it upside down. For example, if the person says, let's say, like per se, when the person says, well, why does God allow suffering? So therefore there is no God. And my morality is what morality is. And then the person would turn around and say, well, God is allowing you to live. So therefore, because you're such a sinful, bad person, it's flipping it upside down and giving it back to the person. That is never a good thing in an argument to do. Anyways, to continue, they do this by asking on what basis is something deemed evil. If there is some moral standard the critic is basing their position on, then the problem of evil becomes an argument for not against the reality of God. After all, in order to call something good or evil, there must be an underlying standard of right and wrong. Theists argue that this standard is rooted in God and his nature. We know his moral laws exist, so we recognize that reality of evil and suffering, but unless there is a moral standard, we have no real basis for calling anything good or evil. So, I'm going to be reading the last two parts of this article, and then we are going to wrap this up. The evils for this video, being that there is 5 minutes left for the video, so I'll go ahead and wrap this up. One moment. So evil, intellectual, and emotional. Before continuing, it will be helpful at this point to pause and explain another important part. Evil and suffering can refer to not only physical pain, but emotional pain too. Consequently, there are differences in approaching the problem of evil, depending on whether one is doing it intellectually, in a detached sort of way, as we are doing in this article, versus ministering to those in need of compassion. In this sense, there is an intellectual way to address evil and also an emotional way to address it. Both are important and both require our attention, but there is a difference. So, not going to, okay, so that is like a 1 to 2 hour video in itself of breaking down this paragraph in intellectual and emotional. So breaking that in half, that's going to have to be its own video. So we're not going to focus on that because I'm going to wrap this up right now. So we will be a world without evil. Read this, and then can God relate to our pain? But couldn't have God created a world without evil? Let's take a look at a few of the options. If God had not created anything, there would be no evil. But is nothing better than something? Hardly. This would be a world without morality. What if God created a world where people could not choose? Choices are highly and very important. So God could force everyone to stop before they were able to carry out evil behavior. But is such a world where freedom does not exist good? God knows best, and as such, he knows that our world is the best way to the best possible world. Yes, there will be evil and suffering along the way. We can rejoice with the Apostle Paul when he wrote, in quote from Romans chapter 8, verse 18, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. And he's talking about eternity once we either transcend into heaven or we die and then meet Jesus after the day of judgment. So the last part here, can God relate to our pain? Considering all the evil in this world, does God really care about us? Not only does he care, but he cares enough to have sent his son Jesus Christ to suffer and die for us. Because of God's great love and sacrifice, we now have a way to be reconciled with him through Christ. This does not mean that we will no longer suffer in this world, but it does mean that we will spend eternity with God. There will come a day when God will wipe every tear from our eyes. End quote. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old other of things will pass away, in Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. To end it with that, so he carries all the tears in his palms from every one of us. So I hope that shed some light on this situation here when discussing the problem of evil, the fallacies of it, trying to understand why God allows suffering, what is suffering. We didn't really, I didn't really get too much into tragedies, but I'll have to actually save that for another video. So this is Pastor Sean. Thank you for tuning into this video. I'll be releasing a video every Sunday for the Sean Stucki Show on the Facebook channel, also on MetaCafe and on YouTube. So thank you for watching, and I'll be coming back next week with a new video. Thank you.